Hello and welcome back to the 100 Day Art Challenge. This is a challenge that was introduced to me by my friend Petra, and I have struggled to keep up with it. They are not consecutive pieces of art that were made one after the other in chronological order. Instead, I made some pieces and then I ran out of time for work that I was doing, so I couldn't make art on certain days. I ended up falling behind and having to make several pieces of art in a day to try and catch up with the deadline, which I don't even know when the deadline was. A friend of mine, in fact I say a friend of mine, Petra herself, finished the challenge I think a couple of days ago, probably on the 15th of September, I think somewhere around there. It could have been earlier, but I saw her announce that she's finished the challenge and I am still chugging away. I'm much further along than the YouTube uploads would suggest, but I'm still quite a bit to go, so I'm weighing up what direction to take for the remaining 30 or so submissions I have left to do. This one is quite an unusual character. It is another interesting face, which I do like to try and inject my portraits with interesting people and not the models necessarily that you will see on the internet or television. I like it to be real human beings, quite interesting faces. And this one I'm calling Tiny Soldier because it's a tiny picture. As you can see, it's really a small square that I'm using, about the size of the palm of my hand, and he has a camouflage cap on. Otherwise I don't think he's wearing anything else that's camouflage, but it just makes me think that he's an old soldier of some sorts, because he's I don't know, you'll see by the time I've finished what I mean by an interesting face. He's kind of got some quite a bit of character to his face, and I'm trying to capture his proportions here in pen first, so that when it comes to using the oil pastels to paint on top, they will be guided by these marks, which may seem obvious, but sometimes I don't need that many marks, and other times I'm not as confident that I have the person really captured in these wispy, scratchy lines, so that's why I go a little bit further. Now, the line with the cap may seem unimportant, but I think that these indicate the shape, the form of the cap. It shows the top curving round, it shows the curve for the center of the cap, the line that goes up the center, and then the bar just below, just above the peak, the brim. And then I'm trying to get down certain points of interest, is what I call them, on the face, which is where there are indentations, kind of like dimples, but instead they're kind of more indentations of different parts of the face, which I think are quite interesting, because without those you would just have this doll-like face with very little contour to try and describe in whatever media you're using. And then the neck can be quite an interesting thing to capture as well. It's got a lot more detail in subtle ways than you would imagine, and then how the clothes wrap around the body from the neck down can be an interesting challenge at times. So that's why drawing that, I'm taking my time and really picking my way through very slowly. I always marvel at how uncertain all of these lines are. I've mentioned it far too many times in these videos, but I just can't understand why I won't commit to a mark. I think it's because I am looking up at the reference and then trying to make a line, but I'm not convinced that it's in the right place. So that's why the lines are so, I don't know, they're just so lacking in confidence, basically. They're just really odd. But then picking away at the eyes, which I think was quite a good thing to do, and trying to capture the shadow that is being cast from the peak. And then parts of the clothing, there are layers of the clothing. There's either a scarf or some kind of wrap, and then there is a jacket, and underneath he's got some kind of a shirt, but there's a pattern on the scarf. I should mention that this reference is I've got this from an Instagram account called Earth's World, and I've put that on the screen now. They are aware that I use their references, they like my images when I've posted them on Instagram, and I will at some point notify them that I've done this series on YouTube and credited them in the description of the video, as well as showing them on screen. They're a great account with really interesting photographs. They take these photographs at the World's Fair in America, and that's why you have lots of really character-filled portraits of people, as opposed to just supermodel looking people. You've got really interesting people from different walks of life, and that's what I really get inspired by, is the people who they choose and the photographs that they take. They have great lighting and really interesting outfits. I'm starting off with a dark brown, as you can see, and that's not just because it's a shadow, it's because I like to blend in the darkest parts. So I apply the dark shadow first, and then I blend it in with different colours afterwards. And you can see that I'm picking through very carefully. I've got the shadow under the cap, but then I've got the eye sockets here, just really picking it away, and then underneath the nose, just trying to get the very darkest bits of shadow in there. And then when I do apply a lighter colour, it will blend in really well, and it will start to look almost like you're spreading butter. It's really painterly and really nice how it just kind of mixes in with each other. It's very smooth and soft, as opposed to the actual texture of when you use them. They feel not greasy, but kind of, I don't know how to explain it. It's like a mixture between crayons and lipstick. So it's at first not the most enjoyable medium to use. And perhaps it's the pastels that I'm using, because I've used oil pastels at a friend's house, and they are much smoother and much more enjoyable, I suppose, as a texture to experience when you're applying them, than what these are. But these were ones that were inherited from someone who passed away, and this is their materials, and I've really enjoyed them and very much appreciate being given these. So they have been very much appreciated and used as often as I can at the moment, as you'll probably see with this challenge. I do relish in using oil pastels. Now you can see this medium pink on top of the brown immediately gives this really nice softening haze to the dark brown, and it has this lovely effect to it, because it doesn't get rid of that shadow, it instead blends it to the extent where it looks more like a convincing shadow beneath the cap, instead of it being this darker brown colour. And then with this pink, which is still quite a heavy pink, it will need to be blended with a lighter colour again. But I'm doing exactly the same under the neck, and a lot of shadow will happen the lower down the subject you go, if the light source is higher up, as is natural, that you'll get the light source from the sky. So that's why you get less light on the neck than you do on the face. But there are lots of parts of this face where there are shadows, and I really like the lighting for this subject. I like the pose, I like his expression, I really like his outfit. So all of this really appealed to me when I came across the image, and there were so many that I collected from Earth's World, and he will, or I say he, whoever they are who runs Earth World Instagram account, will know how much I appreciate their photography, because I just uploaded image after image of me doing these oil pastel portraits from their photographs, and the difference between this and the source image is relatively stark. Contrast between what's actually in the photograph and what I have rendered on the surface is quite different. But I think that's what you should do. You shouldn't really try to copy a photograph, you should just use it as inspiration. Now I've used quite a peachy light pink to completely cover the face, and what's happened is interestingly, it's picked up some of the crumbs of the darker brown and pushed that around the face as well, which I didn't realise at the time would happen, but that could be useful if you do that strategically. In the future I might try that, is to use these additional flakes and crumbs of the darker colours to then add interesting shadow marks and texture to faces or surfaces when I'm blending on the top with a lighter colour, because sometimes a lighter colour can go on a little bit flat, and it really does need assistance from from the other colours in order to create an interesting texture, instead of it just being this solid colour on the surface, which doesn't really add very much to a portrait or to a still life, whatever it is that you are concentrating on. You don't want it to be a flat colour, you want it to blend with other colours. That's why artwork can be so engaging, is the way that people use colour to describe how light interacts with surfaces. And I've tried to put a little triangle of dark shadow underneath that corner of the peak of the cap, and now going onto the coat to get down some black there, but leaving on a little bit of texture as well to try and describe what it is that I'm looking at, because bits of the coat will be catching light, so sometimes I don't put it on completely solid. Now the black that I'm using is such a tiny piece because the previous owner of these oil pastels must have used the white and the black more than any other colour, because they were the most worn down, and they are very useful. As much as I don't normally use black or white that much with paint, with oil pastel they're very useful because you're blending them as well, just like you would with paint I suppose, but you're using them to try to build on top of those colours. And it becomes a bit of a push and pull, which means that at the moment what I'm doing with the eyes is I've put down a black, and now I'm trying to go on top of that with a peachy pink and trying to remove some of the black and make it look like eyes. It doesn't have to be fully rendered eyes with eyelids and all of that detail. You can just suggest things quite loosely and it will be enough to see the humanity in someone's face, and you don't need to really describe anything too much. It can almost detract as well if you do too fiddly a work with something especially this small. I wouldn't want to make the eyes any bigger because then it starts to look cartoonish, and it's just a case of picking away at it. And what I meant by push and pull is that you add something and then you push back into it with another colour, so you're removing what you first added partly removing it anyway, or covering it up, so that you're only leaving a little bit of your first application of dark for the eyes, so that then what's left over looks more realistic. And it's a fiddly thing of trying to put it in and take it away and look at it and make sure that you haven't done too much or not enough. And that's all that this is really. A lot of this is just trying to pick away at some of the features of the face, and then if I've done too much I'll just go back over it with the other colour to try and cover up where it's gone a little too heavy. And oil pastels don't have sharp points. They're not things which you sharpen with a pencil sharpener or a knife. They're just these blunt waxy instruments that you just need to try and find edges if you can, or poke away at the surface to try and get something a little bit more precise than these rounded edges, because they are very fat and just broad tools to use. But I like that because it's like using a big brush for a painting. You get really expressive marks, you get very interesting and challenging ways of trying to have this conversation on the surface of the subject that you are interested in. And I think that it's coming together. You can see details and features of the face that are starting to develop, and parts of the rendering that are becoming more successful. And it is just trying to pick away at it. You can see me dabbing away there. I think I'm trying to describe bits of stubble on the person's face, and it does sometimes just mean you have to just stab away at it, almost like stippling, because if you do too much then it becomes a mark and it covers up too much of what you already had down. And the grey is an interesting colour, but it is a very flat colour, and it's tonally equivalent with the surface already. So the surface is a very light speckled brown. Look at how small that white is that I'm using. I'm stabbing away the same way that I did with the grey. I'm stabbing away with the white to try and add the highlights on the stubble there, and little bits of marks that could be suggested as the hair, because that is with the grey quite effective as an aging person's facial hair, and just their hair poking out around the sideburns and the side of the head around the cap. So that's what I've been using, so that it's not just a flat grey and as I said, with it being fairly tonally equivalent with the background, it needs something else in order to make it work as a colour. And now going on to the hat, I'm using a very warm yellow, and the idea is that to try and build up something which will eventually become camouflage. And I am obviously looking at the reference photo in order to see where I can get away with putting this colour down, and then I can obscure it with greens and black and whatever it is that I'm seeing. So there's this kind of very much an army green that I am applying now, where it does remind me of a lot of camouflage patterns that I've seen in the past, but I'm trying to put it down so that I can remove it again. This is that push and pull technique that I mentioned earlier, and you just have to be experienced and confident that that is a process that you know well enough that you can use it, and you're not concerned that you're losing any description that you're trying to achieve. Now, I just completely abandoned the dots and marks and just thought, no, I'm just going to cover all of the remaining space with the green, because I'll go on top of that with another colour and they will blend. These colours blend together in a very interesting way. I think that when you put down dark, you blend it with some lighter colours and it really softens them. But when you put down something lighter and something dark goes on top of that, it doesn't always blend in the same way. It can do, but in an inconsistent way. So sometimes it sits on top of it very heavy, and other times it softens the colour, and that can help with this type of pattern. Because it's camouflage, you don't want it to be too solid, so parts of the brown that I'm putting down now will be mixing in with the green, and it's not quite as heavy as it would have been if there weren't a green down there already. And then all together with, I think I put a black up there as well, it starts to become quite a convincing camouflage pattern. And parts of the clothing like this, they are difficult. I must admit, this is something which is probably the trickiest part of the portrait, but it adds so much compared to the other portraits that don't have this item of clothing. To have someone wear camouflage means that it makes them have that unique aspect to their fashion, and it speaks to their character of who they are. It gives you a bit of an idea of a backstory of who they might be anyway. So now I'm putting in the black, and combined with the green, the brown and the warm yellow, it will be enough for a camouflage hat description for this portrait. And I think that it again creates this idea for this character, and then all I need to do is the clothing underneath the coat. But whilst I've got the black in my hand, not only the hat, I start to notice other parts of the portrait, and it often happens where I think, wait, there'll be shadow here, and there often is, whether I'm looking at the source material or just seeing parts of the portrait myself and thinking, there must be shadow down by the neck, there must be shadow underneath the chin. There's always shadow from underneath the earlobe, and there is, so I'm putting it down, but I will have checked the reference, although I have experienced before this feeling of wanting to put shadow in places where I feel I've seen it before. Similar to the camouflage hat, I've decided to just put down a colour, like just a solid colour down first, and if you do this coverage then you're basically just removing the background colour that is already on the surface, because as I said, I'm not drawing or painting on white. I am creating this image on a very light brown, and if I cover that completely, then that means that I am now have this solid kind of aqua blue almost, which I can go on top of with another colour, a darker colour to describe the stripes, and it's a darker blue. I'm going to use the edge there, which has not been used to draw very much, because you can see it's cut flat, so that's probably barely being used. That will give you a relatively sharp edge, not for drawing points but for drawing lines, and that's the way that you have to use oil pastel, is to try and find a place where it hasn't been worn down if you're trying to do lines. And if you're trying to do dots or marks or draw anything which isn't a line, and you want something a bit more precise, then you have to look at where it has been drawn with before, and it's been drawn in a couple of different places so that it's created a vague point of some sort, and then you could try to describe something which is not a line but something which needs a bit more of a point to it. They can be a tricky way, a tricky medium to use, but I've got used to them now, and as I said, their imprecise nature is not something I dislike. I actually quite enjoy the challenge. And the last thing I'm getting down is something which is not featured on this portrait yet, which is quite a light brown. It's almost a yellowy brown. So there it goes, and here you have the tiny soldier all finished, and there he is. Thanks for watching.